Hello, I'm Dan Smith. Welcome to this episode of the All Things Book Marketing podcast. Today we're going to be talking to Corinne Moulder, Vice President of Business Development, and Sarah Miniaci, who is one of our senior publicists and a business development associate. And they just returned relatively recently from the Frankfurt Book Fair, and they're going to give us a recap and give some insights to our audience about what they learned and what's happening in the industry and all those good things. And some stats that I pulled up, 285,000 visitors to the fair this year, 7,500 exhibitors, 4,000 events, that seems like a lot of events, and 10,000 journalists were in attendance. So I believe Frankfurt still stands as the largest book fair in the industry, although there's one in Asia that might be larger. Corinne, why don't you start talking? It's your first time at Frankfurt. Previous years, I went, and Sandy Smith and I went, and so this is the first time for Corinne and Sarah. So Corinne, can you start by just giving some insights into the sheer size of the event and what it felt like?
Yes, absolutely. It was first an honor to go. To be passed the reins to go to Frankfurt was just a pleasure, and to really navigate the show with Sarah was incredible. I think I speak for both of us when we say it was just an amazing experience and very professionally enriching. The sheer size of the show, and I had prepped myself for it, even Googling images of what the halls look like. You almost couldn't prepare for how large it was. It was apparently down to 6 halls.
Yeah, I read that in your post.
From the 12 that I guess it used to take up.
And was that from the previous year, do you know?
I think several years ago. So I believe through the exhibitors who we met with who'd been exhibiting there for years that the show had gone from 12 halls down to 10 to 8 and then to 6. We largely stayed in Hall 6 and Hall 4, but even the halls themselves were divided into 3 floors. So the walking shoes did come out. I think we walked about 8 miles the first day, and that was including to our networking events.
8 miles every day or something you said?
Yeah, 8 miles at least the first day. Sarah had her pedometer on, so
wow.
We did know that. But taking in the show was incredible. We got there a couple days early and just navigated for our own use to see where our meetings were going to take place, and walking around to see all the iterations of the publishers and the many different languages that they publish in was incredible.
Well, before I turn to Sarah, you didn't have any beer or anything while you were there, right?
No, none at all. And we didn't understand why you went to Germany for all those years for the amazing networking events.
Because one of the rules I laid out is that we said you could have absolutely no German beer.
Nope,
so
none.
It's good to hear. So, Sarah, can you compare the size to Book Expo?
Absolutely, because I've thought about this a lot since returning and attempting unsuccessfully to describe the size of Frankfurt Book Fair to colleagues and clients who haven't had the opportunity to attend. At Frankfurt Book Fair, as Corinne mentioned, this year there were 6 halls. Hall 6 in particular seemed to be the hub of English language publishing, so territories including the United States, the UK, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and so forth. Hall 6 alone was, I would estimate, larger than the entirety of Book Expo. That was one of 6 halls.
Right.
So it's Book Expo times at least 6, maybe more, but please don't quote me on that, anyone who's listening to this podcast. If you have any objections to that, please feel free to email me. I'd love to know.
Yeah, so it's I think you said probably 6 to 8 times bigger than Book Expo, and at the same time Book Expo is shrinking kind of stuff.
Absolutely, and something to that effect that I think worth mentioning about the size of these fairs is that I sort of take objection to the idea that they are in fact shrinking. I think that while the size of the fair may be shrinking, the activity has perhaps just condensed.
Mm-hmm.
The industry is lean and mean and definitely active. So, I'm not sure it's that the fairs are shrinking so much as the industry is doing things more efficiently. And, in many ways that may have to do with the technology that's in our pockets, and we don't live in the age of the fax machine or the letter anymore. So that could be a reason, I think, and definitely something that was discussed with other attendees.
Right, and we want to talk about some trends, and because our audience is typically authors and publishers, as you know, and so they could get some great insights from both of you about some trends you've seen. Now, Corinne, I know you mentioned it wasn't in, and Corinne just wrote a blog post that's on our site now with a Frankfurt recap. It wasn't in the article, but you had mentioned about how the German self-publishing and hybrid is catching up to the States. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yes, and it's not necessarily just limited to Germany, but we understand the Frankfurt Book Fair is the longest running book fair because that's where, some of the first printing presses were. So traditional publishing, I understand to be the core of the Frankfurt Book Fair. And even evident this year was the fact that the self-publishing area was quite small. However, one of the most exciting things that I took away, and it actually came out of the Bite the Book networking event that Sarah and I had the opportunity to attend, was just talking to, and we've seen it happen here in the States, individuals who've come from the traditional world who are now offering their services and extending their expertise to authors in the form of hybrid publishing. So we did meet with a new firm, although not entirely new. They've been around for 5 years, but they're slowly catching on to the hybrid phenomenon that's starting to take place there. And we're so excited to hear Sarah and I talk about how much we understood the hybrid market and really see it being a true wave of the future. But it was exciting to see that self-publishing and hybrid publishing is starting to take root overseas. And it's no surprise. I know when we had our London office, seeing the slow transition to ebooks,
right.
Where it was booming here, it was still rather slow there. So it does make sense that maybe that's a trend that's going to start becoming much more popular over there. But it's just very exciting, and I think it just offers authors and writers so much more opportunity to share their message.
Right, so they're catching up with the States. So.
Yeah, I think so.
Sarah, can you talk a little bit about, it seemed that audiobooks were pretty featured significantly. And Sarah, can you talk about that at all, what both of you discovered with audiobooks at Frankfurt?
Absolutely. Audiobooks, I think, were in a lot of ways among the topics that were talk of the show. Audiobooks are, I suppose, a relatively new phenomenon in the industry, although conceptually they've been around for a while. Theoretically, we've had audiobooks for a long time. But with the rise of the podcast, with the rise of the iPhone and the Android, and these mini computers that we basically all carry around in our pockets all day, every day, we really are seeing. I think in every publishing landscape, not just book publishing, but also other forms of media, such as magazines and the media industry itself, we're seeing the rise of changing reader habits. And one of the, big pieces of feedback we're often receiving from media, from readers and reviewers, is that books take quite a bit of time to read. The audiobook offers a solution to that issue, and is also just a really new and really fun way to consume content. Many of the publishers we met with at Frankfurt were either interested in developing or expanding their audiobook divisions, increased priority on publicizing audiobooks. Audiobooks are here, and from the looks of things, it doesn't look like they're going anywhere. We're probably in for a very similar scenario in the coming year or two, as we saw happen with audiobooks a few years ago now.
With ebooks.
With ebooks, yeah.
I would fully expect that in 2019 we're going to see audiobooks take a much more prominent role in the industry, and I'm very curious as to what that might look like.
Yeah, you mentioned something interesting, that maybe audiobooks are becoming more popular because podcasts are becoming so popular.
I
People
think
can
so.
listen during their commutes, and rather than having to sit down and take the time to read a book, which is still great, they can hear a book while, driving or whatever, or doing, through headphones or. But I know, you think it relates to the rise in the popularity of podcasts, Corinne?
I absolutely do. I think it gives listeners a chance to choose what they want to consume. And for the commuting world, I know that's a nice fallback. But even Cornelia Funk and the book that we're currently promoting on our team, I had met with her publisher, Eduardo, who specifically focuses in audiobooks. And he was just kind of saying the entertainment that he can bring to an entire family, because it's children that can consume too and be a part of it, and just have a listening experience. So,
Right.
yeah, they made it very clear in the show daily, and there was a full audio conference on Wednesday morning at the show, devoted just to audiobooks. The industry and experts were making it very clear that there's still a lot of room to expand. So we're definitely not seeing this trend slow down anytime soon.
Was there much, and maybe you didn't hear anything about it to either of you, but the popularity of podcasts in Germany, did you hear anything about that? Or I'm sure it's equally as popular, I don't know.
Not so much.
Because it's booming here
Podcast
so
chatter.
much.
Yeah.
And you probably listen to one of my favorite, Murder.
Yes, I did.
Sarah, do you listen to that one?
I don't listen to the Murderous podcasts. No.
But we have a lot of staff members listen to the Daily, which is another big one, a quick way to consume news briefing for the day.
But you don't want to talk about these silly ones they listen to, do you?
No, of course I don't.
Or the Real Housewives of
That's
Cherry Hill
right.
or whatever they have, or something.
Right, the Real Housewives of Cherry Hill.
And Sandy, our esteemed president, and my wife is a huge fan of these trashy podcasts, and My Favorite Murder and The Housewives, and I'm going to get in a lot of trouble for me saying this.
And for those of you who obviously aren't here, he's saying that within earshot of our company president.
And Jamil, you're sitting here. Do you listen to podcasts? Jamil Glenn is sitting in on our podcast.
I listen to a lot of sports podcasts. I don't necessarily, I'm not really into the podcast game as hard as Dan is, but I enjoy a podcast or two on my Apple.
And that's just goes into the power to choose. So you listen to sports, and it gives you the opportunity to fine tune what you want to take in.
And what it's great for our clients, as you know, Sarah, is not to get off topic, but with podcasts is great part of publicity because they're long form interviews. They're not interrupted. Well, they can be commercials, but that's probably one of the reasons they're becoming so popular in our publicity efforts, right, Sarah?
Absolutely. I mean, I'm clearly the resident nerd here today because I only listen to history podcasts, usually about like ancient Rome or something else to that effect. Currently, I'm into ancient Rome, so that's sort of taking up my time. And that's absolutely correct in terms of the reach of podcasts and the opportunities that they offer for authors to discuss their books I think that one of the best things about podcasts is that, for example, Jamil loves sports podcasts, and I love history podcasts, and Corinne loves her murder podcasts. So, for fans of, or people who are interested in a specific topic like history or travel or politics or sports or crime, you're reaching a very engaged reader. I think it's funny that we're still using the word reader to refer to people who listen to audiobooks, because the narrative kind of changes there. But I think what it really boils down to is that the publishing industry is about storytelling, and it always has been. This is just a new way to access readers or people with those stories, and it's a very exciting opportunity, and it's very exciting to see the publishing industry sort of evolving with the modern quote-unquote reader tastes to that effect.
Yes, and I should mention that Sarah, our resident nerd, is in Toronto, and we are Skyping her in for this, as I might have mentioned, and she is our Canadian representative. You might hear a little bit of the Canadian come out in some of her talking. About? Was it? Is it about? So, Corinne, one of the things you mentioned in your article was about diversification of author voices. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yes, and I can start to open up there, and I think Sarah can really add to it from
This
from
was
the
at
publicist
Frankfurt.
side.
You
Absolutely. So that was a big celebration of the diversity of authors, and really just the passion for storytelling, for cultures, for histories, and for people. So that was a big, trend that we were seeing. But I will say, even before our visit to Frankfurt and seeing that splash throughout the show daily and being a big talk amongst agents, our publicists here were starting to see that. Now, I think some authors are uncertain how their background or their culture may play into a publicity campaign. We're their cheerleaders to say we're absolutely focusing on that. If they're comfortable talking about their heritage and the inspiration of their books, really being born out of their diverse background, that becomes for us a way to really tap into the media. Because it brings something new, it brings something authentic. So for Sarah and I, we were excited to see that be a big theme of an upcoming trend in Frankfurt, because we already were seeing it here with our very own clients. But I'd love Sarah to touch on that a little bit more, just from a publicity perspective and any insight she gleaned too.
And Sarah, what you picked up on at Frankfurt about this, and as Corinne said, in your own publicity work.
Absolutely, and I'll preface this by saying that this is a topic that we could do a whole 2-hour podcast on, I think. So I'm going to try to condense my thoughts, but please feel free to cut me off at any point. At Frankfurt, the opening remarks were given by Nigerian author Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, who is sort of iconic in pop culture right now for a number of reasons, including but not limited to her spoken verse on the latest Beyonce record. Not to minimize her many accomplishments, but she's pretty well known. And a tremendous writer. And her address was largely about the fact that representation matters. And in a publishing industry that has, as have many industries, that has long been dominated by a certain kind of a voice, a certain kind of story, that it's really important and it's really exciting to see the doors opening a little wider, a lot wider actually, and us as readers, as consumers, as people in the world, hearing the stories of people who are not like us, and that can have massive ramifications politically, socially, in our own communities, and that is just so heartening and so exciting to see. And it was just wonderful to experience Frankfurt and see how deeply that message is becoming embedded in this massive global industry that really does encompass, as Corinne mentioned earlier, so many languages, so many people, so many voices and territories and experiences. And that's really what stories are about at their heart. On the publicity level, and even in our meetings with various publishers at Frankfurt, this was a topic that came up time and time and time again. In fact, I don't think I had a single meeting in Frankfurt wherein this topic wasn't raised at some point or another. Publishers are extremely conscious of how their lists are representative of certain populations or segments of society, racially, gender-wise, ability-wise, perspective-wise, economically. These are big questions. We need to see other people represented in our stories, and I think publishers are really taking that to heart. This does pose challenges as well for some authors who perhaps do fall into the dominant category, so to speak. And you know, we could talk a lot more about that, but I think that we are seeing on a publicity level that the media are also becoming very conscious of only representing a certain kind of author in a most anticipated books list, for example. So this is a consideration, and definitely something that I would love for listeners of this podcast to contribute their feedback on social media. I think it's a big topic, or email us, or take into consideration as you're developing your stories or figuring out your marketing plan. This is very much like the audiobook in that it's here and it's not going anywhere, and we're only expecting it to grow in the months and years to come as a trend, which feels a little not substantive enough to describe what's going on, but nonetheless, I think we can call it that in a shorthand sort of way.
Very nice. That was great. Now another topic that Corinne, you wrote about and must have been quite interesting is, you know, in Frankfurt, the political aspect. I mean, do they think we've all gone insane over here with the politics and the news? And what political elements what were you getting at when you mentioned that in your
Nothing
post?
so specifically geared towards the states necessarily, but I think just as a whole, and I think it goes into, plays into the point we just covered about the diversification of voices and culture, but using publishing as a way to express, of course. The political landscape is driving a lot of what is being published right now. And I did sit in on the Macmillan CEO speak, which was pretty fascinating, and the last name escapes me, but he had talked, John Sargent, thank you, had talked about his decision to publish Fire and Fury, even with Trump kind of coming after him to shut it down with the cease and desist. And at first he had said he saw it as, you know, a way to make, literally he said, a shit ton of money, and then took a step back from that to really stand by the choice as a way to stand by the freedom of speech, and how regardless of what party, you know, you represent or an author may represent or side with, it's just an opportunity to share a message and to use publishing as a way to really bring a certain opinion to a vast audience. What we did pick up on, and I think we will continue to see politics really shape the publishing landscape over the next several years. Again, not necessarily just because of our current administration and the turmoil, so to speak, here in the States.
But politics in general is, I guess, becoming more of a topic in publishing.
Yes, and what we did pick up on in Frankfurt, and again, we were seeing this trend kind of already popping up in our current representation of our own clients, but in Frankfurt we did really pick up on the message that people are not really wanting to joke about it anymore. It's become much more serious than, pinning one party against another or writing these books that ridicule or make light of the situation. People are wanting to seemingly take a much more serious stance on what political books are coming out, and just what discussions are happening from children's books through fiction and self-help, and how the impact of politics is how everyone's internalizing that.
Yeah. Sarah, anything you wanted to add on that part?
Yeah, I was just going to echo Corinne's thoughts, which I think were really well articulated, and also bring up, as the resident Canadian, who maybe has a more global perspective on these things, because obviously there is a lot of discussion about American politics right now, but I do also think that it's more global, from the EU and the Brexit to the very recent election in Brazil, to Canadian politics. We are seeing this more sober tone throughout the publishing industry, and what was really fascinating to me was walking around Frankfurt, the various, I'm calling them pavilions, halls that represented different territories, such as Middle Eastern publishers, French publishers, Chinese publishers, Dutch publishers, and seeing this sort of sobriety and seriousness regarding politics and political discussions, which I think are increasingly being perceived as sort of moral discussions on the global stage of the publishing industry, and what tone is being taken.
Right. And Corinne, we saw, I think, a bit of a surge in prospective clients who had books that were just kind of silly anti-Trump books, not serious books, and now, as you both are saying, the tone has gotten
much more somber.
Yeah,
and it has.
And Corinne, compared to Book Expo, for our authors listening out there, Frankfurt would seem to be not, unlike Book Expo, would seem to be a fair not necessarily geared to individual authors. Is that true?
Yes, I agree with that. Again, I think the self-publishing area in Frankfurt, I think, will continue to grow, because I was under the impression that the self-publishing area was new this year, and it was our contacts at Papyrus who corrected me and said it's slowly been gaining steam.
Right.
That being said, it's very meeting driven, which we were aware of before we went, but really understood that once we got there. Any downtime that we had, we weren't really able to just pop in to a booth to say hello to a contact. What I do think is important, though, is reading up on, just as we discussed here, because these are just a few of the trends that we picked up on, is for readers and writers who are serious about publishing their story, or tapping into the industry, is that they understand and identify what's going on, and what trends are developing. Because Frankfurt, because it's this hub of the global industry, and people are there and representatives are there from virtually every country where books are being published, to have a grasp on the discussions that are coming out of it and what they can anticipate for the next year, I think that's more important than actually attending.
Right. And Sarah, I know Frankfurt has always been, and I assume continues to be, a real hub for foreign rights deals. Has that diminished at all from what you saw, at least, or is it still a major foreign rights event?
No, I heard from a number of people who I met with and have discussed the fair with, that Frankfurt is in the industry commonly known as a rights fair, and that is a big bulk of the business that goes on there. It's not the only business, but by any stretch of the imagination, but it comprises a majority of the discussions and of the reason that various publishers and contacts from around the industry attend. Book Expo is definitely still a much, much better bet for an author who's looking to attend an industry event and really get a feel for what's going on. One of the differences between the shows that struck me the most was that Book Expo is very librarian and bookseller centric, and very, very invested in the retail side of the publishing industry, and offers authors and publishers a lot of opportunities to engage with the people who are actually out there selling the books. Frankfurt, as far as I could tell, doesn't offer any of that. I didn't meet a single librarian or bookseller on a direct level. I met corporate bookseller people, but no actual booksellers themselves. Whereas at Book Expo, you can't turn a corner without running into someone from that world.
Right. So, Frankfurt is, with people like you who attended, it's great for authors to learn the trends as they venture into publishing or marketing their book, but not an event for them to necessarily attend.
Right. Absolutely.
So we're going to wrap up soon, but Corinne, tell me, you guys went to a couple events. What was your favorite event? So you went to a couple networking parties?
We did. We went to a few networking events, that was a big difference to Book Expo as well, just given the sheer size of it, how many people are there. So many of the events are held on the show floors, which is quite different than Book Expo when they're shutting the lights off at 4:59 to be out of there right at 5. But I referred to it already. I think for myself, it was the Bite the Book networking event that Sarah and I had gone to. And it was just a chance to kind of get back to where we really thrive working with our authors. There were so many writers there that were just attending the show and attending these networking events as a means to gain knowledge and kind of figure out their course of action. That's where we met the hybrid publisher, Red Door, who I found to be quite fascinating in their approach to doing business in the UK. And that's kind of where I felt a little bit more home, because it was much more author interfacing. Right. But besides that, we did have the networking event with APA as well, one of our clients, which was an opportunity to meet a lot of the different clients that work with APA as well. And aside from that, I can't really recall any other ones that stood out so much to me. Sarah?
I absolutely echo your comments, Corinne. APA was lovely, and one fun thing I'd like to point out is that the quality of food and beverage far exceeds anything we've ever experienced at Book Expo.
Now explain to listeners, APA,
APA is the travel guide publisher that we work with. They have rough guides and insight books.
And Sarah, can you, as we wrap up, can you give a shout out to some of the Smith Publicity clients you guys met with out there?
Definitely. So one of my favorite evening events was a group dinner with the Flame Tree Press team. They are a new imprint of Flame Tree Publishing, headquartered in both London, England, and New York. Just a absolutely terrific group of people with a catalog to die for, literally. There's a lot of horror. and just, a delightful group, and always a pleasure to spend time with them. Also had the opportunity to meet with our very lovely and gracious clients from Tokyo, Japan, the Pi International team. Mm-hmm. They were a delight to sit down with, review their titles with, talk about our past campaigns with. And for the first time, although we've been working together for well over a year now, actually meet them face to face. So that was a real pleasure. We had the chance to also sit down with Penguin Random House UK, who we've had the opportunity to work with on a few of their titles, which was lovely. We also had the chance to meet with a variety of other publishers and contacts throughout the industry, such as Nigel Yorworth and Patricia Papadoros, who run the publishing consultants business and have always been lovely and friendly to us, and we've had the chance to collaborate on a lot of projects together. And many more. I feel terrible that I'm surely
that's okay.
Forgetting people, but I know that we're running out of time here.
And I know, I think Corinne, or maybe both of you met with a company that I work with, Callisto Publishing, which produces some amazing coffee table books. It's probably CallistoPublishers.com if you ever want to check them out. And I believe they're going to be coming out soon with some more just amazing books. And because we're not working with them yet, but Corinne found out how amazing the gentlemen from Papyrus are.
Yes.
So Hendrik and Uli.
Yes.
And just briefly tell us about their software.
Yeah, so that's a program to definitely be on the lookout, I think, for self-published authors, although they made it very clear it's for authors choosing any path or those who are agented as well. But it's this incredibly unique and intricate software program for book writing. So using tools such as hovering a mouse over a character name will pop up a complete character profile. So you can make sure that there are consistencies throughout. If you highlight a paragraph, it will show you the sentences that are a little bit clunky, the sentences that are strong. It will help you condense, run-ons. It will identify fragments. It's really taking several writing programs and condensing it into one. And what's very exciting is they're rolling out a free program to start. Right. So there'll be an upcoming client in 2019. Yep. I think those listeners that are, really in the thick of writing right now and on their path to publishing,
keep an eye on
keep an eye out for them.
It's called Papyrus.
Papyrus software, and I think you're going to see a lot of buzz around them, especially at writers' conferences next year.
Yeah, and just some great people. You guys are
wonderful guys.
Well, thank you both, and if you'd like to reach out to Corinne or Sarah, you can go to our website and our contact page, and you have they'd welcome any emails, and you can reach out to Smith Publicity, of course, on our website, smithpublicity.com, or on all the great social media platforms, and Twitter and Instagram and Facebook. And Corinne and Sarah, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us, Dan, and again, thank you for the opportunity to attend Frankfurt. What a amazing experience. Really a pleasure.
Well, I know you guys are amazing, so thank you. Take care.